The storm came without warning that evening. It's the kind of storm that could turn a peaceful land into a battlefield of wind, rain, and noise. Ethan, a lonely rancher who lived miles away from any neighbor, had been riding home after checking on his cattle. He thought he had enough time to return before nightfall, but nature had other plans. Clouds rolled over the sky like dark waves, and before he knew it, the rain started pouring so heavily that it felt like someone had tipped the sky upside down. Ethan pulled the collar of his coat higher, and tried to guide his horse forward, but the path had turned muddy and slippery. Trees bent under the force of the wind, and thunder cracked so loudly it vibrated in his bones. His horse snorted nervously, shaking its head as the rain stung its eyes. Ethan whispered calm words, trying to soothe the animal. But even he could barely hear his own voice in the roar of the storm. The rancher realized he was lost. The familiar trail he took every day had disappeared under water and fallen branches. He tried turning back, thinking he might find a sheltered spot. But every direction looked identical in the thick sheets of rain. His clothes were soaked, his face cold, and his hands numb from holding the reins. His heart began to beat faster, not because he was afraid of the dark, but because he knew storms like this were dangerous on open land. A man could freeze, fall from his horse, or get struck by lightning. He needed shelter, any shelter, and quickly. Then, through the chaos of wind and water, he saw something strange, something small and warm-looking. A light. A faint golden light glowing through the trees on the right side of the trail. At first he wondered if it was his imagination, but the light flickered again, steady and real. Hope sparked inside him as he guided his horse toward it. As he got closer, the shape of a small cabin appeared through the misty darkness. Smoke rose from its chimney, meaning someone was inside. The cabin looked like it had stood there for decades, strong and stubborn against the weather. Its windows were small, its roof low, and its walls thick enough to keep out the cold. Ethan climbed down from his horse with stiff legs. The rain slapped his skin as he walked up to the door. He hesitated for a moment, unsure if he was welcome, but he had no other choice. He raised his hand and knocked firmly, the sound barely audible under the storm. Inside the cabin, Mara froze when she heard the knock. She had not expected anyone, not tonight, not ever, really. She lived alone by choice, far from town, surrounded by trees and silence. Most people didn't even know her cabin existed. Her world was small, but safe, and she liked it that way. Mara approached the door slowly. Her hands trembled slightly, not from fear of danger, but from fear of the unknown. No man had entered her home in many years. She kept her distance from people after the world had shown her more pain than she thought she could bear. Another knock came, almost pleading. Mara took a deep breath, lifted the heavy wooden latch, and opened the door just enough to see who stood outside. Ethan's face appeared soaked, cold, exhausted, yet gentle. His hair stuck to his forehead, and water dripped from his hat onto the ground. His voice shook as he spoke. "Ma'am, I'm sorry to trouble you. My horse and I got caught in the storm. I'm lost. I won't stay long. I just need a little shelter until the storm settles." Mara's heart softened, despite her fear. The man in front of her didn't look dangerous. He looked like someone fighting against the world alone, someone she understood more than she liked to admit. She stepped back slowly, opening the door wider. "Come inside before the cold takes you." Ethan bowed his head slightly in gratitude before stepping in. As soon as he entered, warmth wrapped around him like a blanket. The cabin smelled of pine wood and dried herbs. A small fire crackled in the stone fireplace, casting a gentle glow on the wooden walls. Mara shut the door behind him, locking out the storm. For a moment, Ethan stood awkwardly, unsure where to go or what to do. Water dripped from his clothes onto the floor. Mara pointed toward the fire. "You can sit near the fire to warm up. I'll bring you a blanket." He nodded and walked toward the fire with careful steps, removing his hat and wringing out the water. His fingers trembled from the cold. He sat on a wooden stool, stretching his stiff arms toward the flames. The warmth felt like a blessing. Mara returned with a thick wool blanket. Ethan accepted it with a grateful smile that made her feel unexpectedly at ease. She studied him quietly as he wrapped it around himself. He looked rugged and worn by life, but not unkind. He seemed like the type of man who carried heavy things silently, without complaint. They didn't speak for several minutes. The fire crackled, the wind howled against the walls, and the rain hammered the roof. Mara sat in her rocking chair across from him, her hands folded in her lap. She wasn't sure what to say. Ethan didn't want to intrude, and Mara didn't want to ask too many questions. Finally, he broke the silence with a soft voice. "Thank you for letting me in. I know this is your private space." Mara looked at him for a moment before answering. "No one should be out in a storm like this." "You did the right thing knocking." He nodded again. His eyes wandered around the cabin, taking in its simple but neat interior. A shelf lined with jars of berries and herbs, a small table with a lantern on top, a bed in the corner covered with handmade quilts. Everything felt peaceful, as if the cabin itself protected anyone who entered it. The storm outside grew louder. Lightning flashed through the window, brightening the room for a second before plunging it back into warm shadows. Ethan cleared his throat gently. "Do you live out here alone?" "Yes," she replied. "For many years now. Must be quiet." "It is," she said softly. Quiet is good, Ethan understood. He, too, lived far from people. Loneliness wasn't always a choice. Sometimes it became a habit. As the minutes turned into an hour, the storm only worsened. Mara glanced at the window, then at Ethan. "You won't be able to leave tonight. The storm won't calm any time soon." "I figured," he said. "I hope it's not a burden." "It's fine," she replied, though her voice carried a nervous softness. Ethan didn't push the conversation further. He respected her space, her silence, and her boundaries. That alone made Mara feel strangely calm. Most people talked too loudly, moved too quickly, or tried too hard. Ethan did none of those things. Slowly, Mara made a small, simple meal, warm soup and bread. She placed a bowl in front of him without a word. Ethan smiled, the kind of smile that came from deep appreciation, not habit. He ate quietly, grateful for every bite. The night dragged on. The temperature inside the cabin dropped as the storm pushed cold air through the cracks in the walls. Ethan tried to stay warm by the fire, but Mara noticed his shoulders shivering slightly under the blanket. Something inside her stirred an old instinct to help, protect, and care. Though she hadn't allowed herself to feel that for a long time, she stood up slowly and spoke with a quiet but firm voice. "The fire won't last long through the night, if you don't mind. It's warmer near the bed. You can rest there." "I'll stay by the fire." Ethan immediately shook his head. "I can't take your bed. You live here. I'm just a stranger passing through." "If you're a human being in a dangerous storm," she replied gently, "that's enough reason." He hesitated, unsure if he should argue. But Mara's eyes showed sincerity, not discomfort. Still, out of respect, he insisted on sleeping on the floor beside the bed rather than on it. Mara didn't push him. She simply nodded and brought an extra blanket. Ethan lay down beside the bed, close enough to feel the warmth of the quilts and the gentle heat of her presence, but far enough to respect her boundaries completely as the storm raged outside. The cabin held calm inside, two lonely people breathing quietly. Sharing the same small space for the first time, Mara watched him sleep for a moment. Something about his quiet gratitude touched a part of her heart she thought no longer existed. And Ethan, half asleep on the wooden floor, whispered a silent thank you to whatever force had guided him to her door that night. For the first time in years, neither of them felt completely alone. The storm showed no mercy that night. The wind kept pushing against the cabin walls with heavy force, making the wooden boards creak from time to time. The rain did not slow down, but seemed to fall harder with every hour. Mara lay on her bed awake, staring at the wooden ceiling as the sound of thunder rolled again. Even after years of living alone, storms still unsettled her. They reminded her how small a person truly was against nature. Yet somehow, tonight felt less frightening. Perhaps it was because she was not alone for the first time in many years. On the floor beside her bed, Ethan slept lightly under the extra blanket she had given him. He had refused to take the bed, no matter how much she tried to convince him. He stayed respectful, keeping his distance, making sure she felt safe. That small act of care already placed him differently from many people she had known in her life. Mara shifted slightly, trying to warm her cold hands under the quilt. She turned and looked toward Ethan again. His breathing was slow and steady, and his face looked calmer than when he first entered the cabin. But she could still see lines of exhaustion forming around his eyes. His clothes were still damp from the storm, and the floor was hard. She knew it could not be comfortable. A sudden loud crack of thunder made her flinch. Ethan stirred awake at the sound. He blinked a few times before sitting up slowly. For a moment, he seemed unsure of where he was. Then he saw Mara looking at him from the bed. "Did I wake you?" he asked softly. "No," Mara whispered. "The storm did." Ethan nodded, listening to the fierce wind outside. He stood up gently, stretching his stiff back and shoulders. The wooden floor had not treated him kindly. Mara noticed him trying not to show discomfort, that she could see it clearly. "You should sit on the edge of the bed for a moment," she said quietly. "Your back must be hurting." Ethan smiled a little. "I'll be fine." "I don't want to bother you." "It's not a bother," she replied, her voice low but honest. "You helped me feel less scared of the storm just by being here." Her words surprised him. He wasn't used to hearing such gentle truth from anyone. He hesitated only a moment before taking a small step closer and sitting carefully on the very edge of the bed. Leaving a respectful distance between them, they sat in silence for a while, listening to the storm outside. The warmth from the quilt spread toward him, and he sighed quietly in relief. Mara noticed it and felt a strange tenderness in her chest, unfamiliar, yet not unwelcome. "You've lived alone here for a long time?" he asked softly. "Yes," she answered. "I came here many years ago. I built this cabin piece by piece. It was the only place I felt safe." Ethan looked around the small room again, admiring the handmade shelves, the carefully stacked firewood, the neat arrangement of dried herbs she must have gathered herself. Every corner of the cabin showed her effort and strength. "You did a good job," he said. "This place feels warm, peaceful." Mara lowered her eyes slightly, unused to compliments. "Thank you. It took years to make it like this." "What made you want to live out here?" he asked gently, keeping his tone respectful. She hesitated. Not because his question was wrong, but because she hadn't spoken about her past in so long that her own memories felt like closed doors. But something about Ethan's simple presence made her feel safe enough to open just a few of them. "I needed quiet," she began softly. "Life in town was too loud, too painful at times. I didn't want to keep meeting people who didn't understand me, so I left. I chose this place because it was difficult for others to reach, but easy for me to breathe." Ethan nodded slowly. He didn't ask more. He didn't push her to explain what pain she had faced. He simply accepted her words, which made her feel strangely understood. Mara looked at him then. "And you? You live alone too?" "Yes," he said. 8 years now. Just me and my ranch. After my parents passed, I tried to keep myself busy with work, but work isn't the same as company." That simple sentence held a weight she felt deeply. She understood loneliness more than most people, how it could become both a shield and a burden. The fire in the fireplace sputtered, growing weaker. Mara noticed the room cooling and stood up. "I need to add more wood." Before she could reach the firewood pile, Ethan rose and moved past her gently. "Let me. You've done enough for me tonight." She stepped aside, watching him kneel by the fireplace. He added logs carefully, arranging them so the flames would grow stronger. As the fire brightened again, his face glowed in warm orange light, revealing lines carved by years of hard work, but also softness in his eyes. He returned to sit on the floor, but she stopped him. "Ethan, the floor is too cold, and your clothes are still damp. I'll manage," he replied with a polite smile. "No," she said. "You won't. You shouldn't." Her voice was firmer this time, not from fear, but from genuine concern. She pointed to the other side of her bed, near the wall. "You can sleep on top of the quilt. on the far end. You'll still have space. And warmth? Ethan looked hesitant, almost embarrassed. Mara, I don't want you to feel uncomfortable. You're a good man, she said simply. I know that. And you need warmth more than pride right now. For a long moment, he didn't move. Then he nodded slowly. Only if you're sure. I am, she replied. He gently sat on the far side of her bed, staying as far from her as he could without falling off. Mara stayed under her quilt, watching him settle carefully. He didn't lie down at first. Even sitting, he looked tense, worried about crossing her comfort. You can lie down, she said softly. It's okay. Ethan finally lowered himself slowly, resting his back against the quilted mattress. He kept his hands folded on his chest, not touching anything near her side. Mara could tell he was doing everything possible to respect her space. The firelight flickered, casting soft shadows across the walls. The storm continued outside, but its noise no longer felt frightening. Inside the cabin, there was a quiet warmth, not just from the fire, but from the presence of another soul who carried his own loneliness gently. After a while, Ethan spoke in a low voice. Thank you for trusting me. I know that isn't easy for you. Mara stared at the ceiling for a moment. I don't trust easily, she admitted, but something about you feels steady. His breath caught slightly at the kindness of her words. I'm just trying to be respectful, he murmured. And you are, she replied. Minutes passed. The room grew warmer. The storm softened just a little, though still loud enough to remind them of the world outside. Mara pulled her quilt higher, and Ethan stayed perfectly still to avoid disturbing her. But finally, she turned her head slightly toward him. Ethan. Yes. Are you comfortable? He hesitated. The bed is softer than the floor. I'll say that much. She smiled, a small smile she did not often allow herself. Good. Another long silence followed, not awkward, but gentle, calm. The kind of silence only two lonely people could share without fear. Then Mara whispered something she had not planned to say. It's been so long since someone stayed in this cabin. I almost forgot what it felt like. Ethan turned his head slightly, careful not to shift too much. Does it feel all right? She looked at him with quiet honesty. Yes, it feels all right. Those simple words warmed him more than the fire. Slowly, sleep began to pull at their eyes. Ethan shifted slightly to find a comfortable position, and Mara adjusted her quilt. The bed felt different tonight. Not crowded, but quietly shared. A place where fear did not rule, where loneliness no longer felt endless, as they both drifted into soft, peaceful sleep to the sound of the storm outside. Neither realized how much that simple night one storm, one cabin, one shared space would change their lives. Because sometimes, the smallest moments opened doors that had been closed for years. The storm began to weaken sometime before dawn, but neither Ethan nor Mara noticed the change at first. They slept more peacefully than either expected. Mara had spent years waking at every noise, every gust of wind, every shifting shadow. But tonight, with Ethan quietly resting on the far side of her bed, the world outside felt less threatening. The cabin that once held only her fear and silence now held something different, something steady, warm and strangely comforting. Just before sunrise, Mara opened her eyes. The fire had burned down to glowing embers, filling the room with a soft orange light. She stayed still for a moment, listening to the gentle breathing beside her. Ethan had shifted slightly during the night. He lay on his back, blanket tucked under his arms, his face relaxed in a way that made him look younger, almost peaceful. Mara realized she hadn't seen a man sleep so quietly in years, not with tension, not with worry, but with a sense of safety she didn't expect him to feel in her cabin. She turned her face toward the window. The storm had slowed. Rain still tapped against the glass, but it was softer now, like gentle fingertips instead of angry fists. The wind had calmed too. The world outside felt bruised, yet healing. Mara slowly sat up, careful not to disturb Ethan. The quilt slipped off her shoulders, and she shivered slightly as the cold morning air touched her skin. She wrapped the quilt tighter around herself and stood quietly, her feet touching the wooden floor with soft steps. Ethan stirred the moment she moved away from the bed. His instincts were sharp from years of ranch life. He woke not with confusion, but with alertness. He sat up slowly, rubbing the back of his neck where the muscles were tight. "Did I move too close?" he asked softly, almost worried he might have invaded her space during the night. "No," Mara said, turning toward him. "You didn't. You slept respectfully." He let out a small breath of relief. "Good. I didn't want you to feel uncomfortable." She shook her head gently. "You didn't." Ethan stretched his arms, feeling the stiffness from sleeping in unfamiliar clothes, yet grateful for the warmth the bed had provided. He looked over at Mara, who was now standing near the window, staring at the soft gray sky. "It's still raining," she said quietly. "It'll clear soon," Ethan replied. "Storms like this usually calm down by midday." Mara didn't answer right away. Her fingers rested lightly on the wooden window frame as she stared outside. Ethan watched her for a moment. She looked different this morning. Not fearful, not guarded, just thoughtful, as if the storm had shaken loose memories she didn't know she still held. He stood up slowly, folding the blanket he had used. Mara turned to him and said softly, "You don't need to fold that." "I want to," he replied. "You helped me when you didn't have to. This is the least I can do." Her eyes softened a little at his simple kindness. She wasn't used to such gestures. They made her heart feel warmer than the fire ever could. After a moment, Mara moved toward the small kitchen area where a kettle and some herbs rested. "I'll make us something warm to drink," she said. "You should stay near the fire." "The room is cold." Ethan obeyed without protest. He sat near the hearth on a wooden stool, watching the glowing embers, while Mara filled the kettle with water. She added dried herbs she had gathered during summer herbs, known to calm the nerves and warm the body as the water heated. A gentle scent filled the cabin, earthy and soothing. Ethan breathed deeply, feeling a sense of peace he rarely felt on his ranch, where every day demanded work, strength, and silence. Mara poured the warm drink into 2 simple cups. When she handed Ethan his, their fingers brushed lightly. Neither expected the small touch, and both felt a quiet spark of something unfamiliar, not romantic, not sudden, but comforting, like recognizing warmth after a long winter. "Thank you," Ethan murmured. Mara nodded and sat in her rocking chair across from him, holding her own cup. They drank quietly at first, letting the warmth spread through their bodies. The steam drifted upward, mixing with the soft morning light. Ethan glanced at her. "You look tired," Mara gave a gentle smile. "I rarely sleep well when storms come, but last night, I slept more peacefully than I expected." "Me too," Ethan replied. She looked at him curiously. "You did? Even with the storm?" He nodded. "I felt safe here." The word safe struck something deep inside her, something she had not heard from another person in a long time. She stared into her cup, feeling her heart flutter with a mixture of emotion she didn't have names for. A soft knock of rain on the window filled the silence between them. It was no longer harsh, no longer frightening. It sounded almost gentle now. Ethan finally asked a question he had been wondering since the moment she opened her door to him. "Has anyone stayed here with you before? During a storm? Mara took a slow breath. "No," she said quietly. "You're the first person who's stepped inside this cabin in years." He looked thoughtful, touched by the trust she had shown him. "Why did you open the door for me?" Mara lifted her eyes to him, and for the first time since he entered her home, she answered with honesty that felt raw and unguarded. "Because you knocked like someone who needed help. Not someone who wanted something." Ethan understood. People who lived alone could sense the difference. After finishing their warm drinks, Ethan stood and walked to the window beside her. "The rain's slowing. When it stops, I should head back." "My horse needs care," Mara nodded, though her chest tightened slightly at the thought of him leaving. She hadn't expected to feel this way. She had lived for years without wanting company. Now, suddenly, the cabin felt different, a little too quiet at the thought of returning to life without another voice. Ethan didn't miss the faint sadness in her eyes. It made his heart ache in a way he didn't expect. He turned toward her. "Want to say something?" She looked up at him, waiting quietly. "You helped me without hesitation. You gave me warmth, shelter, and trust. I won't forget it." Mara swallowed softly. "You don't need to repay me?" "I know," he said. "But I want to come back. Not because I owe you, but because I want to see you again." Her breath caught slightly. She wasn't used to such words. They felt honest, gentle, not demanding, not heavy. "Why?" she whispered before she could stop herself. Ethan stepped a little closer, not too close, just enough for his voice to feel personal. "Because last night, I didn't feel alone for the first time in a long while." Mara looked away, fighting the warmth rising in her chest. She didn't know how to respond. No one had said such simple, kind words to her in years. "You don't have to answer now," he said softly. "Just know that if you want company even from time to time, I'd like to be that company." Her eyes slowly lifted to meet his. "Think I would like that," she whispered. Ethan smiled a soft, grateful smile that lit up his tired face. A few hours later, the rain stopped completely. The world outside was covered in wet leaves, fallen branches, and patches of soft mud. Mara helped Ethan gather his things. His horse, tied under the small shelter near her cabin, shook off the remaining raindrops and nuzzled Ethan gently before mounting. Ethan looked at Mara one last time. "I'll come back," he promised. Mara stood with her hands wrapped around herself, not from cold, but from nervous warmth. "Be careful on your way," she said softly. He nodded and rode away slowly, turning once to see her still standing in front of the cabin door. Watching him leave, for the first time in years, Mara didn't walk back into a silent cabin with a heavy heart. She walked in with hope, the kind that settles quietly inside a person, warming them from within, the kind that promises life might hold more than fear and loneliness, the kind that begins with one storm and one gentle man who needed shelter. For many days after the storm, Mara found herself thinking about Ethan more than she expected. She would sit by the window in the morning, watching the trees sway gently in the breeze, remembering the quiet warmth he brought into her cabin. She would make tea and catch herself glancing at the empty stool by the fire where he once sat. Even the silence felt different, now not as heavy, not as cold, but as if something was missing. Mara wasn't used to missing someone. She had lived alone so long that her world had become small and predictable. But after Ethan left, her heart felt like it had been nudged awake from a long sleep. She had not asked for it. She had not planned for it. But it was there, quiet, sincere, and undeniable. Meanwhile, Ethan returned to his ranch with thoughts of Mara lingering in every quiet place. He fed his horses, but found his mind drifting back to the memory of her soft voice. He repaired fences, but caught himself smiling at the thought of her gentle kindness. Even the long nights felt lighter, because now he had someone to think about. Someone he wanted to see again. He waited 3 days partly because he didn't want to overwhelm her, and partly because he needed to convince himself she truly wanted company. But deep inside, he knew he couldn't stay away for long. The storm had brought him more than shelter. It had brought him a connection he didn't expect. On the 4th morning, he saddled his horse early and began the ride toward Mara's cabin. The weather was clear, the sky soft blue, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of wet earth and pine. The world looked freshly washed after the storm, like everything had been reset. Mara was outside collecting firewood when she heard the distant sound of hooves. Her heart jumped before her mind could reason. She straightened up, brushing dust from her hands, and watched as Ethan appeared from behind the trees, riding toward her with a familiar gentleness in his posture. When he reached the clearing near her cabin, he slowed his horse and dismounted. He gave her a soft smile, one that spoke more than words could. "You came back," Mara said quietly, unable to hide the warmth in her voice. "I said I would," Ethan replied. "I keep my promises." Mara felt something bloom inside her chest, a soft, warm feeling she had almost forgotten existed. They stood for a moment, simply looking at each other in the peaceful morning light. No storm, no fear, no tension, just a people who had found comfort in each other's presence. Would you like to come inside? She asked. Ethan nodded. Only if you don't mind. I don't mind, Mara said softly. Not at all. Inside the cabin, everything looked the same, yet it felt different now that he was there again. Ethan noticed the small details he hadn't paid attention to during the storm, the handmade quilts, the little wooden carvings she kept on a shelf, the dried herbs hanging from the ceiling beams. Her life was simple, but full of effort. It made him respect her even more. Mara prepared tea while Ethan sat near the fire. She felt less shy this time, less unsure. His presence no longer felt strained, it felt natural, as if he had been part of her days long before the storm. They talked for a long time, slowly getting to know each other beyond the roles of rancher and woman in a cabin. Mara learned that Ethan loved the sunrise more than the sunset, because it felt like a new start each day. Ethan learned that Mara gathered wild herbs, not only for tea, but because their scent made her feel safe. The conversation moved like a quiet river, steady, calm, and comforting. Mara found herself speaking about things she hadn't shared in years, like how she had once dreamed of having a small garden, but never had help to start it. Ethan listened with full attention, nodding gently, asking questions only when she seemed ready. At one point, he looked around the cabin thoughtfully. You built this place with your own hands. That's strength, Mara. She looked down, a little embarrassed. I did what I needed to do. That's the kind of strength people don't talk about enough, he said softly. Her heart warmed at his words. She wasn't used to someone seeing her effort as more than survival. Ethan made her feel like she had done something worthy. When afternoon sunlight poured through the windows, Ethan helped her chop firewood outside. They worked side by side, moving in quiet rhythm. Mara had never worked with someone before, not like this. She found herself enjoying the shared task more than she expected. When they finished, Ethan wiped sweat from his brow and smiled at her. You work harder than most men I know, Mara laughed quietly. Living alone teaches you things, he nodded, understanding more deeply than she realized, as the sun began to dip behind the trees. Ethan stood near his horse, preparing to leave. Mara's hands trembled slightly as she held a small bag of herbs she wanted to give him. For your tea, she said softly. Take it. Ethan took the bag gently, his fingers brushing hers. Thank you. I'll use it. Before he mounted his horse, he hesitated. Something in him felt unfinished, unsaid. He turned to her, eyes soft but serious. Mara, he began, I'd like to see you again. Not because I feel obliged, but because I want to. Truly, Mara's breath caught. She looked at him for a long, quiet moment. She had lived many years without letting anyone close. But Ethan didn't push or demand. He offered gently, leaving the choice in her hands. I would like that too, she whispered. He smiled, a slow, warm smile that reached his eyes. Then I'll come back soon. And he did. Over the next weeks, Ethan visited Mara regularly. Sometimes he brought small things from his ranch, fresh eggs, apples, or a bundle of hay for her storage shed. Sometimes he brought nothing but his company, which she found she looked forward to the most. They shared meals, stories, small moments that slowly built trust. Mara taught him which herbs healed wounds and which made good tea. Ethan taught her how to mend saddle straps and how to read the sky for weather signs. Their quiet companionship grew stronger with each passing day. One evening, near sunset, Mara walked with Ethan to the edge of the clearing as he prepared to leave. The sky glowed with shades of gold and pink, and the wind carried a soft chill. Ethan turned to her, his expression gentle. Mara, I don't want to rush anything, but I want you to know something. She looked up at him, listening. You're not alone anymore, he said. Not unless you choose to be. The words pressed gently into her heart. They didn't demand anything. They didn't take anything. They only offered a place beside him, not to replace her cabin or her independence, but to give her something she had quietly needed for years, companionship. Mara stepped a little closer, her voice soft but steady. I don't want to be alone anymore. Not like before. Ethan nodded, understanding everything she meant. He didn't reach for her. He didn't touch her. He simply stood there, allowing the moment to settle naturally between them. As the sun dipped lower, painting their figures in warm light, something unspoken, but deeply real formed between them. Something not made of storms or fear, but of understanding, patience, and quiet care. Eventually, Ethan rode home again, promising to return soon. Mara watched him disappear into the trees, not with sadness, but with calm certainty, for the first time in many years. Her cabin did not feel like a fortress built out of fear. It felt like a home that no longer held silence as its only companion. A home where one stormy night had brought a man who knocked gently, and a woman who found the courage to open her door and her heart.